Hello and welcome to the CNBC Africa special on the Mining Indaba 2018. I'm Ropiwa Madzena. Now this is the place where business stakeholders and governments from all across the world come together to discuss key issues in the mining sector. Over the next 13 minutes, we'll take you through some of those major themes that have been raised at this here 24th edition of the African Mining Indaba. Now, one of the key themes that are being discussed at this year's Mining Indaba is the renewed optimism in South Africa's mining sector. I discussed this and more with Shirley Weber, who's the head of natural resources at ABSA.
I think from our side, we are cautiously optimistic, like you've mentioned, on the activity levels. We've seen a whole lot of mining companies, big and small, actually increasing their activity from a funding point of view. It's not just mines there that they're trying to mine, they're actually doing expansionary capex, going deeper into many of these mines, and also making sure, that they try and do things for their partners that's helping them to get, the ore, etc., out of the ground. So it's a matter of positive activity, not just in the mining space, but also in the related activities that comes with it. For us, that's very important, because if we can benefit the value chain, that means a whole lot more people in the country actually benefit, from the economic growth that we see is going to happen in the next 12 months.
Right. Let's speak about the value chain, and I'm sure a large part of the value chain or the whole process of mining in South Africa is impacted on by the policy regulations in the country. How do you think these have affected the industry right now and going forward?
I think when the new mining charter was announced, there was obviously a lot of criticism against it. I think our government actually took a positive step in actually retracting it, so it can be re-looked again to ensure, that economic growth is not stopped by putting things in place that's not sustainable. So clearly, all the legislation will cover beneficiation and all the value chain activities related to mining specifically. And for us, that is all very positive. So I do think when all of those conditions are re-looked, that we mustn't forget about the value chain, but we need to make sure it's sustainable, because there's not many big players down the value chain, and it's to make sure that the financial institutions and the environment actually understand that we also need to consider, the smaller guys going down the value chain.
Have you seen direct implications of the mining charter in terms of some miners' operations maybe divesting and the like?
We haven't seen direct that there was a stop in activity or even a delay in activity. I think it's a matter of everyone believes, that there will be, the caution out there to make sure that it's sustainable, that economic growth will be focused on, and not just putting things in place to benefit, certain parts of the country, because the whole country needs to benefit from this legislation. So I've seen, negative sentiment, but negative sentiment didn't stop activity going down the line in funding activities, etc. No.
I read somewhere something very interesting about the fact that the mining industry, South Africa, has a legacy and it needs to change, and that we need to focus on other economic drivers, only because the commodity cycle, for example, is so cyclical. What are your thoughts in general of the industry in terms of it continuing to be an economic driver?
I think it's very important for our country as well. I mean, Minister Jeffrey Debe mentioned, that the government is very willing, to stand behind mining, to make sure, that it's positive results, in legislation, etc., going forward. And I think that's how ABSA sees that as well. We are very willing to support projects that is sustainable for the future, and we follow clients into Africa as well. So it's not just South Africa. I mean, our job is to focus on Africa and making Africa the place to come to. So that's what we're trying to do from our side.
Miners are increasingly looking for merger and acquisition opportunities, particularly now as they look to consolidate and restructure their operations. Craig Brewer, who's the head of banking at ABSA, shed some light on the direction that miners are taking.
I think this year is going to be different. Last year it was very quiet in terms of the M&A front, a couple of blockbuster deals. I think this year we're going to see less of the larger deals, maybe in the smaller type. And where we're seeing is in certain exciting new commodities. If you look at recent technology advances, you've had the lithium-ion batteries. The big game at the moment is cobalt and lithium. And I think you're going to see some M&A activity there. There's a scramble for the commodity. I think it's approximately 45% of cobalt is used in batteries. And the more that you have Teslas and the like moving forward, the more there is this demand for this commodity. So we're going to see a lot of action, I think, in the DRC, where in terms of the copper, nickel and cobalt mines, but also in terms of things like our neighbours in Zimbabwe with their new regime. Lithium, I think they're one of the top 5 producers, and we're going to see some action there with people beginning to venture back into Zimbabwe.
What about the traditional commodities, if I may, so your oil and some of the resources, what are those trends looking like?
If you look at the more fundamentals where we see a lot of action year on year, I think in gold you're going to see consolidation this year, particularly in South Africa. You've seen the start of that with Harmony's acquisition of Mo Kutsong's mine from Anglo Gold. And that's just a classic example of, for Anglo Gold it's non-core, for Harmony it's going to be a very profitable cash positive mine. And you saw Sibanye do that successfully when they spun off those mines out of goldfields. I also think there's still some consolidation to go there. Some of Harmony mines are very close to Sibanye's in the Free State. So we may see further consolidation there in the gold sector. That is in South Africa. In coal, you've already started to see a bit of a move of the big global players out of Eskom-tied coal. You saw Anglo American announce their 4th disposal of and the last asset in terms of their Eskom-tied coal, and that was the New Largo mine. You've also seen South 32, the Australian global player. And that's announced that it'll take its energy coal assets in South Africa and regroup them with more local ownership. So I think some of the issues that we've had here in South Africa with regards to an uncertain regulatory environment, particularly in terms of the charter, and some of the issues we've seen with the state-owned enterprises such as Eskom, beginning to play out in terms of asset disposal strategies by some of the larger players.
That is a very, very scary thought, that divestment that we are beginning to see. But just further on the regulatory environment, you've mentioned how it's already starting to play out. But what does this mean for future investments, particularly from global industry players?
Remember, in South Africa, we compete for that investment dollar from offshore investors. They've got various places they can invest, from Latin America, North America, Australia, our neighbours all the way through Africa. So we really have to make it that South Africa is an attractive investment environment. Regulatory uncertainty just takes that away. And we've seen that in terms of this mining charter. There's been an impasse between government and business for the last 2 years with all these court applications. I think we're beginning to see a new air come through. We heard Mr. Ramaphosa at Davos say that if the mining charter was in the way of inward investment, then let's sort the mining charter out. I don't think anyone disputes the need for a mining charter for empowerment and transformation. The people of this country need to share in the resources, but we need certainty, and we need to balance the returns of offshore investors putting dollar capital into this country and the returns we need to give to them, whilst ensuring that the rest of this country can benefit from our resource base.
How will the volatility of the commodities market impact Africa's mining outlook? This is also one of the major themes that have been discussed throughout the Mining Indaba.
I think we are very lucky that all our countries, as well as the rest of Africa, spans across many commodities. So, anything really, we're talking about the gold that's there. Clearly coal is very important for Africa and the power generation. And then from our side as well, we're obviously looking at oil and those type of sectors, the energy related ones. So that for us is very important, but it actually goes across. And there's a lot of new commodities that's actually getting the limelight now, which is cobalt and lithium, which is linked to the energy parts of the world. So that now is the new ones that's really coming up.
I want to focus on commodities a little bit more. Surely there is some caution because the commodities industry is so cyclical in terms of price and productivity.
From our side, it's always been there. So seasonality is and cyclicality is not new to the world of commodities. It's a matter of making sure that you understand the industry that you're in, you understand the players that you're definitely working with, and also making sure that whatever funding we put in place is sustainable throughout the lifetime of the project. So we make sure that we understand management, we understand the project, understand the country, and that's why it links back again. If the country chop and change, all the things that they need to do from a legislation environment, it just puts everything at risk, and investors will leave those various countries. So that's the important part for us.
Yeah. A lot of the conversation at this year's Mining Indaba is investment in junior miners, and you mentioned it earlier that they're going into very interesting commodities that have to do with power. How important are these junior minings in advancing the mining sector in Africa?
I think for many of the African countries, you always have your big players, but it's important for each and every African country, and South Africa included, that we don't leave the junior miners behind, because those are the entrances to the mining industry that can actually play a much bigger role, creating, uplifting certain communities in the various parts that they play in. So again, depending on the management of the junior miner, the type of commodity that they're in, the project plans for those type of commodities, if it's going to be a cobalt or a lithium, if it's gold beneficiation, and maybe the junior miners linked to those type of activities, it definitely plays a different role in the way that we look at those activities.
And I must ask, has APSA spotted some junior miners that they will be investing in and continuing with that growth?
We definitely have, apart from the big players out there, we definitely have mid-tier and junior miners that we look after, and we try and make sure that we stay with those entities and take them through difficult cycles, because that's our life. Apart from the exchange rates, the commodity cycles are there.
It's clear from the conversations that have taken place throughout this edition of the Mining Indaba that Africa is open for business. The mining sector across the continent is waiting for potential global and local investors to contribute to the growth of the industry. And on that note, that's it for this CNBC Africa special. From myself, Oropiwa Madzena, and the team, it's goodbye.